Shabbat Shalom. I hate pigeons. I'm sorry, I have to confess this. I know it's disappointing to some of you. I know that it makes me smaller in your eyes. I know that there's a reason and a purpose for all of God's creatures. And I shouldn't hate anything. I've tried everything. I've tried to evade them, ignore them, avoid them, disregard them, elude them. Nothing helps. I hate pigeons. And whenever this week's Torah portion, Tazria, and its usual companion, Metzora, come around, I'm reminded of the damage that pigeons can do. I think that I can trace my loathing to a trauma that I experienced more than a decade ago. My wife and I were in Europe. We'd been away for 2 weeks. During our absence, we arranged for carpenters to do some work in our apartment. It was summertime. They must have left the windows open. Do you have any idea how much damage one housebound pigeon can do? Not only that, can you imagine walking into your dark apartment at night after a transatlantic flight, eager to just throw down your luggage and crawl into bed and suddenly hear hysterical, ear-piercing shrieks from your wife? "Something flapped over me," she screamed. So what? What are you talking about? Are you delusional? You know, we just watched one of those zombie movies on the transatlantic flight. "Something flapped over me. I can't stay here. We have to go to a hotel." And then I heard it. Feathers flailing, wings flapping, that morose, mournful, melancholy, maddening, malevolent, monophonic minstrelsy. I flipped on the lights and dashed upstairs, grabbing a broom as I ran. Go figure what's living up there. For all I knew, there was a colony of pigeons. And you know, unlike some Gentiles, as a general rule, Jews are scared of animals. Nature for us is something not to commune with, but to commute through. And then I found her, nesting in our bedroom, sitting on a mantle. I swear, that pigeon had such a satisfied gleam in her eye. "Look what I've done to your apartment, you human filth." For the life of me, I still can't figure out how she produced all that pigeon poop. White, cake, runny, leprous expulsions and eruptions. Where did it all come from? What did she eat in our apartment for 2 weeks? Or however long she had been there? How could one pigeon have produced so much stuff? I disposed of her. I remember my Russian grandmother telling me that to avoid starvation during World War II, they would eat pigeons. So, that's all I could think of. I was crazed and savaged, and violence surged in me. No, I'm just kidding. I found an empty tote bag, bagged the pigeon, threw it out on the roof, and the next morning she was gone. Flew the coop. No worse for her experience. To the contrary, I could have sworn that the next morning, as I was checking out the now despoiled tote bag, there was a veritable loft of pigeons flying overhead and dropping pigeon bombs, cackling and cooing as they rode the air. And my wife and I were left with the task of cleaning the apartment. There were mountains of white, green, and even reddish streaks caked into the walls over every last square inch of our bedroom. For some reason, the pigeon decided to spend most of her time there. We called in the specialists, heavy-duty industrial cleaners. They finished the job in a couple of hours. Now, the reason I think of this episode every year at this time is that this part of the book of Leviticus speaks about skin ailments and other affliction. The Bible describes in minute detail infections, eruptions, boils, and discharges, and all sorts of leprous growths that affect people. And it turns out that a house can become infected too. If a house is found to contain greenish or reddish streaks that go deep into the wall, an Israelite was supposed to call in the specialists, the heavy-duty cleaner, the priest, because there was a risk that this house was impure, infected, leprous. First, the homeowner had to empty the house. No furniture should be left inside so that the priest could come in and examine the house thoroughly. If the priest found that indeed the house is infected, he would order it closed for 7 days and thoroughly cleansed. Upon examination a week later, if the infection spread, then the house would be condemned. The Talmud, however, clarifies that there never was an infected house that required destruction, nor will there ever be one. The restrictions on the priest are so severe that in practice no house would be so damaged as to deserve being condemned. The sages put limitation after limitation on the priest. He had to find that the white spots were the size of 2 barley corns on 2 adjacent stones on 2 different walls that come together in the corner of the house, and that the spot needed to be 2 barley corns long and 1 barley corn wide. The house needed to be illuminated. It needed to have exactly 4 walls. If it had a balcony, it was not within the parameters. Every wall must be made of stone and wood and soil. It must have at least 8 stones, 2 per wall. It must be in Israel. In other words, in practice, it was impossible for the priest to condemn the house. It's the rabbi's way of saying, we know what the Bible says. Condemn the house if the plague spreads. But, come on, don't be ridiculous. We're not going to throw a family out of their house because of pigeon poop or some other plague. So ask the rabbis, why are the provisions of an infected house even written in the Bible, if in practice there never actually was such a house? And the sages responded with this fabulous phrase, Drosh v'kabel sachar, so that people might study it and receive rewards for their efforts. The passage in Leviticus, claim the rabbis, has nothing to do with the actual legal provisions. It's there simply to cause you to think. What's the lesson? And what's the reward? In all the passages relating to skin diseases and other eruptions, the rabbis understood these not in a literal sense. After all, how could a house take on the human characteristic of being infected? Rather, the sages felt that all references to this disgusting white, greenish, reddish slime were figurative and symbolic. They were external signs of a house in disarray. The sages zero in on the requirement to empty the house of all of its content before the examination takes place. They contend that an infected house is simply the outer sign of a character flaw of the people living inside the house. For the rabbis, that character flaw was selfishness. They describe that the Beit HaMenugah, the infected house, revealed the owner's selfishness when the contents of the house were emptied and brought out for all to see. Then the public saw that the homeowner owned a tool that he refused to lend to others, instead claiming that he didn't possess such a tool. People asked this homeowner for some garden tool, a spade or an axe or a shovel, and he claimed he didn't own one. Alas, when he was required to empty his home of all of its content, the whole neighborhood saw the tool. Everything was on the front lawn. But what they really saw was this person's meanness, selfishness, miserliness, his ungenerous and uncaring character. And there were few attributes that the sages condemned more than selfishness. They were passionate about the ills of selfishness. They understood that the natural inclination of people is to think only of themselves, that human beings are inherently self-absorbed, and that they needed to be persuaded, embarrassed, cajoled, shamed into thinking of others. Because they understood that a world of selfish people, people who think only of themselves, is a world of war of all against all. A world of continual fear and danger of violent death, and the life of man solitary, poor, nasty, brutish, and short. We often think that who we really are can be hidden from other people. That only the walls of our home know who we really are. Ah, if only those walls could talk. But we can't be a terrible person inside and a good person outside. You can't be miserly, cheap, ungenerous, selfish, refusing to lend what you have, refusing to give of yourselves to others, and hide that from the world. If you are pigeon-livered and lack gall, as Hamlet testified about himself, eventually it will be revealed to all. At some point, you must empty the contents of your soul for all to see. There is no place to hide. Your home will not camouflage you. The household is infected, and everyone knows it, as doth the raven over the affected house, boding to all. In the end, our character is like an open house. What a great lesson, and what a great reward for studying the book of Leviticus.